I'd like to actually start, introduce briefly Biolabs as a seminar. We try to bring to the biotech entrepreneurs some tools that we hope will be useful to grow your company, develop products that will benefit patients, and that's what we're going to go into with our speakers momentarily. We're going to focus on this very important topic of the strategic marketing. Maybe a better term to use has been suggested by some panelists as strategic market access. And to frame the subject very quickly, developing a product means ensuring that it's safe, that it's efficacious, that it can be manufactured to the satisfaction of regulatory agencies. That doesn't mean that the product is going to be used by the patient. So what does one need to think about in terms of health economics, in terms of patient benefits or payers and reimbursements? So to help us think through those issues, and maybe more importantly, how to tackle those issues, I would like to introduce our group of distinguished speakers and invite them to turn on their cameras. And I will also show this first slide. Our speakers are today Corinne Blachier-Poisson, who is on the board of LEM, where she had the Commission for Patient Access to Therapeutic Progress. Corinne is also the CEO of Amgen France. I would like to then introduce Klaus-Jürgen Preuss, who is founder and managing partner at EPC Healthcare in Germany, a consultancy that focuses on market access and reimbursement issues, amongst other subjects. Thank you for coming to us all the way from Germany, Klaus-Jürgen.
My pleasure.
And last but not least, Frédéric Girard, who is the Vice President of France Biotech and the coordinator of the Market Access Working Group, and also in another professional life. He has many professional lives. Frédéric is in charge of commercial operations for in Europe for DBV Technologies. So welcome to all, and I would like to maybe, after this very brief introduction, ask you to describe very shortly, if you would, your professional experience, maybe starting with Frédéric before moving backwards to the others. So Frédéric? Frédéric, you're on mute.
Usual start of a conversation. So thank you, Jean-Jacques, and good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Frédéric Girard. I'm working in life science industry for the last 30 years. The last 20 years as a managing director or senior executive in different kind of company, affiliate of big pharma, from affiliate of big pharma to SME and startup, developing and commercializing innovative medicine, generic, biosimilar, and also medical device in France and also in different countries, having spent 10 years as an expat, mainly in Europe. So I have the pleasure to run the commercial operation of DBV outside the US and sitting at the board of France Biotech, running the working group on market access. I'm also a foreign trade advisor, which is a network of 5,000 entrepreneurs appointed by the Prime Minister to help French company expanding abroad, and I'm running the healthcare committee at the Council of Foreign Trade. And thank you to Biolab for the invitation today.
We are happy to have you. Thank you very much, Frédéric. Klaus-Jürgen.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Klaus-Jürgen Preuss. I'm a typical German, and I joined the pharmaceutical industry 50 years ago in the 1970s, and I started in a pharmacy. But spend a life in a pharmacy was not enough, so I studied medicine. So I have both eyes on the market, on the pharmacy side and on the medical side. I worked for Bayer, one of the former giants in Germany. Then they were getting to agriculture, so that was no more the good place to be. And I joined the Rhône-Poulenc-Rohrer group and headed the German operations as my last position in the pharmaceutical industry. Afterwards, I started in medical devices, in California, hearing aids. And the last step was insurance business and clinical management. So I have at least some experience, maybe to help the young companies to make their good way into the market.
Thank you very much. And I hope we have many questions on how those companies can be helped. Corinne.
Yes, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jean-Jacques, for inviting me to this webinar. So Corinne Blachier-Poisson, I am the General Manager of Amgen France, and after 30 years of experience, now I have a general manager roles, but before I have shared my experience between marketing and sales roles in different companies, European or Americans, and market access, health economics positions, which have given me the opportunity to observe some big success and also some failures that I can share with the group this afternoon. And also I had an experience of 4 years for what was called at that time the French Drug Agency, which was in charge of the evaluation of all the drugs and all the devices for reimbursement. And I propose now to start with my, I have a few slides that can set up the scene and give you the opportunity to my co-speakers to share their experience and views, and of course to give you the opportunity to ask questions. This is I will start with this very traditional exercise that we do in many companies, which called the Target Product Profile, the TPP, which is designed after we have all the phase 2 data, phase 1, phase 2 data. And the goal of this TPP is to describe the targeted characteristics of a drug. And you see on the left that we have a pharmacoprofile, the expected label of the drug, with of course a view on the initial indication and all the other indications coming with the life cycle management, with a description of all the population and the therapeutic strategy, which is described in the trials, the efficacy and the safety that we target in our clinical trials, and a targeted price, and because the first part of the targeted, the TPP, we could say, is the question of volume and who will benefit from the drug, and then the question of the price and the question of the health economics outcome, what we expect from these phase 3 trials on the patient-related outcomes and the resource used in the healthcare system to treat these patients. So this is a traditional way of describing our future drug, and we develop and design phase 3 to support this TPP. In practice, what we observe is that traditionally this TPP is very oriented for the approval. And the global development and development teams have really all the control of this TPP, and their first goal is to get approval from the regulatory agencies for the drug. It makes sense because this is the first step. Without any approval, we don't have any drug. Yet, once we have the approval, if we don't have answered and prepared all the different questions in the bottom of this TPP, we have not fully filled our mission. And this is why, Jean-Jacques, if you can jump to the next one, why is it so important to involve access and health economics outcome research teams? I have used these terms because it depends on the companies, but many companies have access teams on one side who are in charge of developing the access strategy, developing scenarios, evaluating the risk of the different probability of success. And you have health economics outcomes research teams who are more working on the data and what is needed to support this access strategy. And it's really important that these teams, who can be in some cases only one team, assess the risk of getting no access or a limited access based on this phase 3 development plan. And their role will be to evaluate the risk of not getting access or getting a more restricted access, and develop some scenario solutions to propose. And this is why it's so strategic. It's a very critical and strategic work that the market access teams have to do in early development, is to answer these 4 questions around that you see around the bubble. The first question is, who are the patients who will benefit the most from the drug? And this is the key question, which perhaps today seems obvious, but which was not obvious in the past, because the vision of many development team was to identify the population where we had some benefit and to try to capture the broadest population. Now, today, we really have to focus on the population of patients who will have the highest, the biggest benefit. Second, we have to describe this, what we call the unmet medical needs. This is something that we hear very often, perhaps too much as something obvious, but it's still a critical question that sometimes we do not answer. Is there a real unmet medical need? And this is a key question that the access and the epidemiology departments and the health economics department need to demonstrate, because we can have, in fact, we can have some ideas of what the patients are expecting, and in practice, the physician and the patient do not consider this need as the most important. So it's quite important to answer properly this question. Now we have a third question, which is not necessarily which will not have the same answer than the first question. For which patient will it be reimbursed? There are two steps, because I can give you an example. You can demonstrate a benefit in a population where the patient will get a significant benefit. There is an unmet medical need, but the payers will not reimburse it. Why? For example, I have in mind an example of a drug that we have developed within Amgen, which is in hypercholesterolemia. And the drug is a very potent drug, on top of the traditional, the statins and ezetrol, the standard of care. And we have demonstrated that this drug is effective in the patients who are intolerant to statins. But in practice, payers don't want to pay for this population because they consider that this population does not really exist. And it comes back perhaps to the unmet medical need. The payers consider that this population is very difficult to identify, is probably that the statin intolerant is not a real patient. He or she is more a patient who does not take the statins properly. And this is why in most of the countries all over Europe, this drug, which has demonstrated efficacy in this subpopulation, has not received reimbursement because there was a high risk from the payer's point of view of misusage. And of course, all these questions have to be addressed in complement. In a context where you have to look at what is going on externally, what your competition is doing, how they are developing their own drugs, how the environment is evolving, is the indication you are working on is a real public health priority, do you have other alternative strategies in this country, in this market? So it's always very important to keep an external perspective and not work with a very internal point of view. I will just end with this slide, which is what we call the magic triangle, and to say that a smart market access strategy is to find the right balance between the 3 points of this triangle. The first one is what is the best indication, indication to target, and the best indication to target is not necessarily the broadest one. It can be a narrow one if you can really demonstrate a high benefit. So it's a balance between the indication size, so the future population size, the time to market, because of course to get approval and access in a narrow indication will take less time than in a broad indication, and of course the last but not the least, the expected price. So you have to find the right balance, the right trade-offs between these 3 goals, which are sometimes all opposites and divergent. And this is where we can see the best strategic thinkers.
And it's a very complex equation to be solved. Thank you very much, Corinne, for this very short introduction to what could be a long lecture. And clearly, it's a very complex matter that needs to be thought through with the right clinical trials, the right phase 3 to support all of this. Some of our audience may not be that far yet in their development. So I'm going to turn to Frederick and ask you maybe a brutal question. Why should I even care? It's something I'll care for when, you know, I design my phase 3.
You absolutely need to take care of that if you want to get the money you need to go to develop your product. And when I say your product, is a product the patient need. So I'm going to introduce even more complexity in the equation from Corinne, because we started biotech company is a very dynamic environment. You have 60 new biotech every year in France. Each biotech is having 2 to 3 products in development. So it gives you an idea about the potential and the dynamism, but they are all short of money. So the projects are coming from university in most of the case. You know, there is a transfer to the private sector. A biotech is created to then move to human and grow the molecule, but you will need to raise money. And if you want to attract investor, and some of us are also investor, maybe in very small amount of money, but you of course will care about the return on of the investment you put. And to convince investor, you will need to demonstrate that the patient you want to treat, they exist. You know, so there is a medical need. You will need to demonstrate there is a positive benefit-risk ratio. This is what Corinne mentioned. And the regulators are going to take care of that. And the people are very much aware of that. But you will also need to demonstrate that somebody is ready to pay for it. You know, and basically that the benefit is worth the price you expect. So it could be the payer, but it could be the patients themselves. Because believe me, if somebody was coming with a vaccine against COVID-19 in sufficient quantity today, at a price between 15 to 20 euro, I believe the vast majority, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So you will need to convince investor, but for that you need to understand basically that there are some rules to secure or to maximize the probability of getting a good market access. You need to understand you have some opportunity for early engagement with payer and to crash test your development plan. You need to do that before the phase 3 in order you put all the necessary endpoint in the phase 3. So this is difficult because most of the executive of the biotech company are new in the business. They are great scientists. They are super expert of their technology. They don't really know about market access. So they need just to get to be aware, and this is the role of associations such as France Biotech or also, I believe, BioLab, and they need to find the best consultant to accompany them because contrary to what described Corinne, of course, biotech company can't have a big HEOR team with pricing expert as you could see in big pharma, but you have very good people, you know, in the market to help you and support you.
Thank you. So we should care because we need to raise money, and the people who are going to give us the money will care.
Absolutely.
Sorry. So when we were preparing this talk, one of you and Klaus-Jürgen, I'm going to turn to you there. But during that talk, there was a reference made to the golden age of clinical development when life was easy and the only thing we needed to focus on was getting FDA approval. I was shocked. It was the first time ever I heard people refer to getting an FDA approval as easy. That goes toward the complexity of what we need to deal with to make sure that after the approval, things go well as well. So Klaus-Jürgen, you have advised many companies through this process. How do you separate out all this complexity? And when a young company comes to see you, how do you grasp this elephant? Which trunk, which leg do you start from?
Well, there's a quite easy answer. The first question I always ask is what Corinne already mentioned. How big is the unmet medical need in your target indication? And unfortunately, we see even with many of the new biotech companies, we see developments in areas where there's a really good standard of care. So if the standard of care is already sufficient, or at least is making some progress, the more you have to demonstrate your patient-related outcomes and the additional benefit which you can generate with new technology. So the gap between the existing standard of care and the desired add-on in outcome, that's a key question you have to answer with any technology you're bringing on the market. In the past, if I remember my first years in the industry, we made some lousy clinical trials and we get approval everywhere. This is definitely gone. You have to demonstrate clear benefits, patient-related outcomes in a specific target population versus a competitor who has an economical and feasible standard of care. And that makes it very complex and very differentiated for new companies to accept these new framework in which they are acting. In the past, it was much easier, but that's definitely gone. You see another point. Many of the companies, especially of biotech companies, are targeting orphan indications. Orphan indication is something nice because the standard of care is not there or is lousy. So any additional benefit will be granted by authorities. You see, to make an application for an orphan drug, sometimes you need only clinical studies with 30 to 40%, depending on your target population. If you go into broad indications, and you have all the problems of a big phase 3 and the competitive studies. So an escape strategy for many of the new technologies, especially for ATMPs, advanced therapeutic and medicinal products, which fall in the same range, is to go for orphan indications. But even in the orphan area, when we started orphan, it was quite easy. now regulators are heading on the orphan. You know, the threshold is coming up every year. The circumstances are getting harsher. But at least if you go for orphan indications, you have a very big chance to get it soon, a very quick market access. Today, even better prices than in other areas. That might not be the way for the long-term future, but that's one of the preferred strategies for many of the companies.
So here we're talking about indications and then getting the appropriate price and reimbursement strategies. But if ICH has allowed to have a somewhat uniform path for clinical development and regulatory framework, the reimbursement system, the payer systems are different in every country. So do you have to study 100 countries? How do you deal with that?
Should I answer?
Yeah, well,
okay.
Everybody's raising their hand. Go for it. Yes, Klaus-Jürgen, and then Frederick.
Okay. For example, if you want to get access in Europe, you have to deal with the EMEA, especially in the case of biosimilars, biologicals, and of orphan drugs. National registrations are not anymore so important as they have been in the past. The FDA is another hurdle which is to overcome, and in Asia you have to deal with the Japanese and now with the Chinese, which is quite much more difficult than we have it in Europe. And if you can tackle the American and the European scene, then you have at least 70% of the market. The rest is Asia Pacific. So we see, even if the global headquarters, they are heading for the US first because it's easy, they know everything, then they're looking for Europe, and then they're starting, especially with the reimbursement system, it's becoming complicated. You know, reimbursement is still a national concern. And despite the fact that we are trying to harmonize with the HTA activities a little bit this process, but you see it even in the Corona times, if it comes hard to hard, everything is local. You see, we are erecting the boundaries, and the same holds true for the pricing issues. If you want to get a good price, then you have to think strategically. Where do you get initially the best price? And unfortunately, that's never France. You get a lousy price in France. So you have to introduce in another country, maybe Scandinavia, maybe Austria, Switzerland is not clear EU. So you have to have a country-wide strategy with regards to pricing and to reimbursement, unfortunately. The registration issue is pan-national, but not pricing, reimbursement, and market access.
Frederick, you wanted to comment, then I'll come to you, Corinne. How do the biotech companies in France do it that you've been able to observe?
Yeah, so of course, as Klaus-Jürgen was mentioning, US is 50% of the worldwide market. So you clearly, you have to try by any means to maximize your probability of accessing the US market. FDA is well understood by the biotech company. What is always underestimated is the complexity of negotiating, with payer in the US. So often people think that after the FDA, it's sort of an open boulevard to the US market, but it's more complex than that. And we have different initiatives to raise the awareness of the complexity of the management of the payer in the US, but certainly biotech company needs to get good consultancy on that. For the rest of the world, of course, when you are a French biotech or European biotech company, you better look at Europe first before looking at China, because we have been receiving many questions about, how to access the Chinese market. And it's probably better to look first at Germany, UK, Sweden, or Italy before looking at China. Of course, the price and reimbursement process is country specific. However, there is a common denominator. And I think if you organize maybe 3-4 early advice before your phase 3 with the biggest agency, NICE in the UK, GBA in Germany, France, HS, maybe Sweden, you will get the relevant endpoint you need to put in your clinical trial. So, and this is what you need before you start the phase 3 very early on, when you don't have, a sophisticated organization in your company. Then when you have the phase 3, so you are progressing through the registration process, you can raise, of course, more money because, of course, your probability of success is higher. Then the best way is really to look at the local specifics, to make sure your dossier is tuned to the local situation. Because, of course, in the local situation precedent, you can observe, yeah, they are always very good idea. And this is the only way you can optimize your chance of success.
Corinne, how does a large successful company like Amgen early on in development segment the world to look at these issues? Do you actually look at 100 countries to start with? Do you focus?
So we are lucky to have market access teams in all our affiliates all over the world. We are present in 100 countries. So we have, of course, some people in the markets who are able to evaluate the potential, the risk, and so on. But still, it's extremely complex. And what we have today, we have some archetype countries, identify a few markets where we have very strong access teams who are collecting data, who are very used to this way of thinking, of evaluating scenarios, who can forecast the payers' behaviors, and all this data and evaluation is brought to the global team, who can make decisions about the different steps in the development plan, because it's a question then of timing and which, for example, the question of which indication must be developed the first is the result of many discussions. And at the end, so of course, very often we decide to fill the gap, to answer for the FDA and the EMEA, but we have to roll out after the access plan in every country and for all the rest of the world. So it's a complex, yes, a complex planning, yes.
So I want to go
we have other questions. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I want to go to some of the questions that we have been asked. Thank you to the audience for doing so. Let me remind you, you can ask the questions in the Q&A function. And I'll direct two questions to Corinne, actually. And if it feels like I'm picking on you, I want to own up that I used to work at Amgen. And I think it's, even though it's a long time ago, I think it's an excellent company. So I know that there are also some failures. And so one of the questions is, what happens if you don't do this? And I'm very comfortable in putting it to Amgen because doing a great job, but what happens if you don't?
Yes, I can share an example of poor access anticipation, I would say. It was a long time ago, so now we can talk about it. And now this brand is a real success, but it took more time than expected, and it was new for Amgen. I'm talking about a drug we have, Prolia, which had been initially developed in the post-menopausal osteoporosis. The development started probably 2000, something like this. And we got the approval in 2010 in Europe from the EMEA. Everything went okay, very smoothly in the US and in Europe at the regulatory level. The issue was that we had developed this drug, which was the first representative of a new class of anti-osteoporotic. We had developed it according to the guidelines from the FDA, which required trials versus placebo. and on the fracture endpoint. So when we came in, so I can explain what happened in France, but it had been a challenge also in the rest of the European countries. When we started the submission of our dossier, access dossier in most European countries, all the payers were requiring data versus the active and the reference drugs, which were at that time already the biphosphonates, on an endpoint, hard endpoint, which was the hip fracture endpoint. And we didn't have that. So it was a challenge. It took much more time than what was expected, because we were really lacking the right comparator, the clinical trial versus the right comparator on the right endpoint. So
following the regulatory guidelines can be necessary, but it can be tricky if you don't anticipate the next step.
So ideally, you need to have trials to address the regulatory requirements, and trials and studies to address the access requirements. Now it's extremely costly. So this is why we have to, it's a question of compromise between the FDA and the EMEA requirements, between the payers requirements in Scandinavia or in France, and the medical unmet need can be different from the north of Europe and the south of Europe, for example. And
okay,
the
so
standard of care also.
So I'm a startup, and I need to find my way through all of this. I suppose, Frédéric, if I come to you and ask for advice, France Biotech can steer me towards some consultants. But can we talk to those agencies? Can you talk to NICE? Can you talk to the Swedish agency? Klaus-Jürgen, Frédéric, who would you recommend? I mean, should young companies go talk to these agencies and payers?
Each health economic agency is having a process of early consultation that is quite well documented, and you can access the process online usually. So, but you need to be prepared. So you can't go unprepared. So you need to go with precise question, because sorry, it's going to be I'm going to be trivial, but you will get the answer only to the question you ask. You know, so. I've seen the question coming through the chat. So the minimum you should do to convince any partner or investor that you do the right job is first, and it's not very expensive, bring few good experts, clinical experts around you, to define exactly the unmet need and the patient profile. Bring some patient association around you, to help you better qualifying the unmet need, and then go and discuss with regulatory and health economic agency, probably with the help of a consultant to help you, structuring your briefing document. Because every time you go to those agencies, you will be asked to complete a briefing document where you will expose, the problem, where you will ask a question, and expect an answer on the best way to address one of the challenge. And that needs to be precise. But when you have all those documents, ad board, expert opinion, minute of early advice, this will bring you already a good set of documents to convince any partner that you are doing a good job.
I'm conscious of the time, and we are coming to the close. I just would like to look a little bit in the future. I mean, we had ICH, we have the EMEAs are existing. It's a fact. There is a consolidation of processes at the European level. Can we hope to see that in this world? What's the future of those reimbursement strategies and pricing? Anybody can take that on? Corinne? Frédéric? Klaus?
No, it looks very appealing, the idea to have, one health economic assessment and one price quickly, in all Europe. I think I will be retired before it come to reality. Because as Klaus-Jürgen was mentioning, the price range, is significant across the different European countries. The time to market is also hugely different, between couple of weeks in Germany and 1.5 years in France. So, I mean, it would be good for the patient if we can speed up the access to innovation, but I think it's a long, long way to go.
All right. So, sorry, go ahead, Karen.
No, I just want to complete what Frédéric says, that probably I will be retired too. But
although you are much younger,
we have to be realistic. All the European countries, member states, are very eager to keep their independence and to be the master of and control their healthcare budget. So they consider that, okay, they can delegate, they can give the power to the EMEA to approve drugs, but when it comes to reimbursement, it's another story, and they want to be sure that they control the situation. And they found many, many reasons not to delegate and not to transfer this power to Europe. What we could perhaps see before our retirement, Frédéric, is a kind of what some European agencies have worked on is common work on the relative effectiveness evaluation. So they could do part of a job. Decide what are the right comparators, what are the right endpoints, and evaluate the magnitude of the benefit of this drug versus against these different criteria. This has already started across the EU, HTA bodies across Europe, and now we in collaboration with EMEA. So it's probably the model, something intermediate that we could perhaps observe in the future, and which can have some benefits. It will depend how it is implemented, but we can see some benefits.
Well, let's hope that it makes that exercise a little bit easier for all the people who are listening to us. But in any case, it sounds as if all the people involved and the consultants that may help those companies have a lot of work on their hands and cannot retire anytime soon. But with that, I would like to thank you all very much, all three of you, in the name of Servier and of Biolabs. To our audience, as you prepare to leave, please kindly fill in the questionnaire that will appear if you would. And we hope to have the opportunity to interact with you all directly, and you can continue maybe to ask some questions to our panelists in the networking session that will follow if you will join us to this next Zoom meeting. So thank you all very much for attending, and we hope to welcome you soon in the next edition of the Biotech Startup Series.